Lucario! 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 Lucario!
Oh yes, it's finally time to talk about it. Anime Anubis, the dog who is Pog, the aura ascertainer, the furry with the feet, Sir speaks a lot like Kakarot, the Riley Railer himself, Lucario, the jackal to jerk. Hey, Aura Guardian, you've based your entire YouTube channel's aesthetic around Lucario. What do you have to say for yourself?
He's cool.
How could you say such a thing?
That's confidential.
That's disgusting.
I'm sorry, who are you? Wait, aren't you that Birdkeeper Toby guy?
Pray we never speak again. Lucario, for whatever reason, is one of the most popular Pokemon ever. Easily the most popular Gen 4 Pokemon, at the very least. You can easily tell just how popular a Pokemon is by its common merch selection. Take Funko Pops, for instance, the most basic of vanilla-coated white bread merch. Which Pokemon were they focusing on first? Gen 1 Pokemon, almost exclusively. Remember, these are for mainstreamers, so that makes perfect sense. But the first few that aren't from Gen 1, they were all either Eevee evolutions, starters, or Lucario. That's disgusting. And only in more recent years have they begun branching out again, though mostly with later gen starters and popular meme mon like Wooloo and such. Remember, these are for mainstreamers. They will not make a Trubbish Pop vinyl no matter how much I want them to. Because the irony is too strong. Arguably, the Pokemon Company knew that Lucario was going to be popular from the start, because even though it's not a legendary or mythical Pokemon, it's got its own movie, and it's a Gen 3 movie at that. Yeah, like they couldn't even wait to reveal it in its own generation. They needed to show it off now, because it was gonna build hype for the next games because the design is that good.
Oh, you like this? Well, quit clutching your pearls and buy it, and all the associated merchandise!
And poor Mewtwo. They kicked Mewtwo out of the cool Pokemon Club and cut him out of Smash Bros. Brawl, replacing it with Lucario, the new coolest Pokemon! And even after its initial time in the spotlight, they kept Lucario in Smash Bros. From then on, though I suppose that's because it never really did become irrelevant, did it? Even after Gen 4, they kept pushing it, keeping it as a mainstay Pokemon, making sure it was always being thought about in some way. In Gen 6, it became a sort of mascot for Mega Evolution, which is only reinforced by the recent Pokemon Direct, when first showing off an all-new set of Mega Evolution cards. Who do they start with? Mega Lucario. And in Gen 8, it was one of Ash's main Pokemon, part of his World Championship team even. They include Lucario in everything, every chance they get, even when other Gen 4 Pokemon aren't. Pokemon Rumble, Unite, Mystery Dungeon, Conquest, Ranger, Pokken. It's one of the few non-traditionally cute Pokemon in Cafe. It's front and center on Pokemon Go's 5th anniversary art. And back up a bit. Look at Pokemon Unite's main title promotional image. Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, Gen 1, regional variant of a Gen 1, Greninja Talonflame, Lucario! Okay, what the heck is Talonflame doing here? And there are so many sets of the TCG that include Lucario. Like, there's a Lucario with nearly every new TCG gimmick. It's in like every season of the anime, and was even an important Pokemon in the big I Choose You anime movie reboot thing. It's all over the merch, and like every third plush line has one. It's on their greatest hits poster collection. And here's art that was a big set of posters and notebooks and postcards and things. We got the 3 main Pokemon: Pikachu, Charizard, and Lucario. And even Pokemon Friends, which literally just came out. Your icon options are Gen 1 favorites, current starters, Pokeball Master Ball, Lucario. And I just noticed the Japanese Pokemon Center lets you search by Pokemon, and who are the front page options? The most recent games and DLCs legendaries. The most recent game starters: Charizard, Zygarde, the upcoming game starters: Pikachu, Gardevoir, Lucario. They even gave this gosh dang thing an official life-size plush, an honor given to so few Pokemon. And the big question is, why?
Furries.
I mean, yeah, but...
It's furries! Of course Game Freak knows they exist and are taking full advantage of that. blue Renamon is a furry icon now.
But there has to be something else. Like, I'm not a furry, and I think Lucario is cool. I'm not a furry! Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, I do think anthro animals can be neat, but I'm not like,
Hey, what do you think of that?
So, okay, maybe Game Freak saw the furry cult hit that was the Digimon Renamon, introduced in 2001, and decided to emulate the design with a whole new base, and so we got Lucario, introduced in 2005. See, that's how you emulate another monster tamer as a source of inspiration. But what are the elements they added? What inspired Lucario? What makes Lucario so cool from a Pokémon lore and design standpoint that it deserves all of this love and admiration? It can't just be that some folks find it sexy. Well, we took the time to look into it because that's what we do on this channel, and if you enjoy looking deep into Pokemon parts, by which I mean their lore and origins, or lorigins, then be sure to subscribe. Let's get to it.
Lucario!
Oh, and if you think Lucario's merch selection in the West is impressive, just take a look at the Japanese Pokemon Center. Lucario socks, Lucario shoes, Lucario shoes again, Lucario stapler, even Lucario ice cream spoon. I managed to snag the spoon thanks to this video's sponsor, Zenmarket. You see, the Japanese Pokemon Center doesn't want to bother with international shipping, so they don't. In fact, a lot of Japanese online stores don't, which is where Zenmarket comes in. It's a proxy shipping service with access to over 10,000 Japan-only shops. You can browse them within their site, or copy and paste a link to the item you want into their search bar, and there it is. Check out and they'll order everything for you and have it shipped to their warehouse, where they then pack everything up nicely and ship it to you internationally. It's pretty swanky. Now I don't have to buy plane tickets just to get the latest exclusive Pikachu. Like Pikachu eating ramen. Yeah! If that sounds cool, definitely check them out at the link at the top of this video's description. And a huge thanks to Zenmarket for making videos like these possible. So, what are Lucario and Riolu based on? And I know, you're screaming at me, Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead. He's a jackal and a furry. And on one hand, you're right. But also, on the other hand, you're left. And there's so much more to it than that. And on a mysterious third hand that just appeared out of nowhere one day, oh, thank you. Ooh, yes. You're also wrong. Because despite common belief, Anubis is not the Egyptian god of the dead, Osiris is. Also, despite common belief, Anubis isn't even a jackal, but a golden wolf, and we'll get to that. But first, Anubis is the god of mummification, embalming, and all necropoli. A necropolis is essentially a burial ground that isn't in the main city, town, or village. Necropolis literally means city of the dead, and in ancient Egypt, they were where royalty, higher-ups, and the pharaohs were buried. When not a super fancy pyramid, anyway. So yeah, Anubis does have to do with the dead, but it's more about tending to the dead and their corpses rather than death and the act of dying itself. Also, despite common belief, ancient Egyptian gods weren't furries. That's just us putting our modern ideals of symbolism and art onto a civilization that existed back when mammoths still walked. In actuality, the Egyptian gods would usually transform between fully animal and fully human. They were animorphs. To most of our knowledge, they most likely never spent any time as humans with animal heads in any of their stories or mythologies. However, sculptors of hieroglyphics... Sculptors? Writers? Drawers? Carvers? They would depict a god as an anthropomorphic animal person because that's the easiest and fastest way to get that concept across when you're a scribe that's got to get a bunch of art and hieroglyphs completed by the end of the day. Egyptian scribes were basically extremely overworked office workers, but with less clothes, and also even less hair. I mean, you'd be pretty stressed too if you had to figure out how to explain the concept of a whole mythos using only emojis, which, again, according to the popular memes and such, are modern-day hieroglyphics, after all. I use upside-down smiley face all the time. I couldn't tell you what it means, but it just feels right, you know? Just like how letting my wife write this video feels right, because she's fixated on ancient Egyptology stuff. Like fixated. You know? Fellow neurodivergents?
Yes.
And Anubis, of course, is her favorite Egyptian god, because he's like everyone's favorite Egyptian god. Hence another reason Lucario is so popular. Interestingly, if we look at my wife's very much loved and very highlighted copy of Eric Horung's Conceptions of God in Ancient Egypt, the One and the Many, we see that at page 156, a text from the 18th Nome, which is basically their word for district, of Upper Egypt, which is actually southern Egypt because the ancient Egyptians saw the world map as upside down compared to how we see it, mainly due to the direction the Nile flows, also speaks of an entire necropolis of tombs of gods. And in the next paragraph, from an early period, gods was a common word for the inhabitants of the other world, and from the 11th dynasty, the necropolis is called the place where the gods are. So basically, Anubis isn't the god of the dead, but he is the god of where the bodies of both the gods and humans who are dead rest, which is different from where the afterlife is, which is what Osiris is the god of. Confusing, I know, but there's also like 18,000 different kinds of souls. We're not gonna get into that. The ancient Egyptians' views on death and the gods and the afterlife are incredibly complicated, and also changed a bit during different periods and dynasties, which makes sense given that ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for 3,000 years, which is an incomprehensibly large amount of time for our tiny little human brains that only live like 80 of that. Like, consider Cleopatra, one of Egypt's most famous rulers. By her time, the pyramids were already 2,400 years old. They were ancient ruins already. Egad. But I digress. Let's get back to Lucario and 𝓂𝓃𝓆𝆃. To start, why is Lucario a dog furry? Well, because it's based on Anubis, like we said. And if we look at the Wikipedia article for Anubis, he was usually depicted as a canine or a man with a canine head. Archaeologists have identified Anubis's sacred animal as an Egyptian canid, the African wolf. Yes, the African wolf, or golden wolf, not a jackal. Is this another example of pop media and artistic depictions and ideas changing common belief about history? Like Vikings having horned helmets, like Napoleon being short, like Jesus and his apostles being white with white names, ninjas looking like this, or Pandora having a box instead of a jug? Well, no, actually. This is a recently discovered correction. In a 2015 genetic analysis, animal geneticists were like, wait, that well-known gold-colored canine isn't a jackal, it's a wolf, which... mind blown, I guess? Well, it doesn't really change much beyond we now know Anubis is a wolf, not a jackal. That actually makes him kind of even more of a furry though, really, doesn't it? And in the days of old Egypt, these golden wolves were often seen at grave sites, most likely to try to dig up the human and animal remains, but maybe the ancient Egyptians saw them and were like, what if they are protecting the dead? It's possible, but no one knows for sure. It's not like they wrote down all of their thought processes behind why the gods looked the way they looked. Also, let's think about Anubis being based on a goldish-colored wolf, because that is the color of Lucario and 𝓂𝓃𝓆𝑃's shinies. The ancient Egyptians believed that the skin of all the gods was made of gold. Well, except for Re, who in later periods was depicted with skin of platinum to signify that he was very old and better than all the other gods. He completed all the godly achievements, but this is why the pharaohs would bury themselves in sarcophagi and/or funerary masks of gold, to show the gods that they were one of them. And speaking of the correlation of these Mon, we see that their normal colors are clearly inspired by Anubis's black. But like, why is Anubis black when he's based on a gold-colored wolf and all of the gods have gold skin? Well, because the ancient Egyptians placed a lot of symbolism in their art and statuaries, because to them, the act of depicting something would make it happen. And for them, black was a very powerful and positive color, which was because of the Nile's inundation. This was the flood that would happen every year and was paramount to ancient Egyptian civilization, even existing in the first place, so obviously super important. This inundation would bring lots of nutrients and healthy bacteria from further inland to Egypt. This would cause the sand and the dirt to become black, so to them, black sand or dirt equals lots of crops and good beer. So, life. in the ancient civilizations. And as for Anubis himself, he was black due to his close relationship to the dead and mummification and embalming specifically. According to George Hart in A Dictionary of Egyptian Gods and Goddesses, the black of portrayals of Anubis represented the discoloration of the corpse after its treatment with natron, and the smearing of the wrappings with a resinous substance during mummification. So that's all the black on Lucario. Now what about the blue? Well, it's probably inspired by Egyptian blue, which was a pigment that was associated with Egypt in the ancient world because Egypt heavily used it for thousands of years. It's considered to be the first synthetic pigment even, and in modern times, it's known as calcium copper silicate. Maybe that copper contributes to why Lucario is steel type. But after the Roman era, Egyptian blue fell from use, and thereafter the manner of its creation was forgotten. But in modern times, scientists have been able to analyze its chemistry and reconstruct how to make it, which I think is super neat. It's like color necromancy. The ancient Egyptians used this blue pigment frequently to imitate the beautiful blue of lapis lazuli and turquoise, two very sought after and beloved stones in both ancient and modern times. As an example, King Tut's funerary mask, arguably the most famous piece of ancient Egyptian art, has eye outlines and eyebrows made of lapis lazuli, and also pieces of turquoise in it too. And the fact that the area around their eyes specifically is black, contrasted with the blue fur, might be a nod to the ancient Egyptian practice of wearing kohl, which is essentially that ancient Egyptian eyeliner and eyeshadow they're so famous for. And actually, it was in use in the area back before Egypt was even a civilization. So even before agriculture, people knew that eyeliner was hot. Well, no, actually, it was originally used as an attempt to stop ailments of the eye, and to try to stop the harsh rays of the sun from affecting the eyes as much. Though it came to be more of a fashion statement later on, and was used primarily by royal women. Now, there is another color on Lucario, that tan torso and the tan neck on Riolu, which I think is a perfect representation of the linen wrappings mummies were wrapped in for mummification. Remember, again, Anubis is not the god of death, but the god of embalming and the mummification process. And another fun fact, the linen used for mummification was almost always just cut-offs from local everyday life. Like clothes and storage bags. You'd make them, and you'd have some fabric left over that you cut off, and give it to the weird mummy guy, he'll take it. And how do we know this? Well, because there are several mummies with scraps with hieroglyphic writing on them that basically say, "wheat from so-and-so farmer," and the like. Which just goes to show how human and yet bureaucratic ancient Egypt was. We haven't really changed much, huh? Anubis was also tasked with judging people's souls when they died. He would weigh it against the pure feather of Ma'at on a scale. Ma'at was both an Egyptian goddess and the entire concept of truth, justice, and fate all rolled into one. If one's soul tipped the scale, this meant that they did not embody the ideals of Ma'at, and so the soul would be eaten by Ammit, a goddess that was half lion, half hippo, and half crocodile. Souls lighter than the feather, though, would get to skip right past the Vorfest and join Osiris in Duat, the ancient Egyptian afterlife. Well, one of the afterlives. There's many. It's complicated. Let's skip that. But this ability to see someone's soul is very akin to the fact that Lucario sees the mystical aura of people and Pokemon alike. Lucario's Pokedex entry states that only trainers who have justice in their hearts can earn this Pokemon's trust. It's basically one-to-one, just swap soul with aura. Lucario's tail is shaped like a khopesh, a sickle-shaped sword that originated in ancient Egypt. Only the outer part of the blade would be sharpened, with the inner part being used to try to wrestle weapons out of the enemy's hands or try and trap their arm. And this too could be a part of why Lucario is steel fighting type. Another part is that boxing was supposedly invented in ancient Egypt, or Sumer, which had very close ties to ancient Egypt. This style of boxing is the earliest recorded combat for sport, so certainly deserving of a fighting type Pokemon. Then, the tendrils on Lucario's head, and to a lesser extent Riolu's, are likely, at least partially, inspired by the wigs that most of those that were royal or wealthy in ancient Egypt wore. They had lots of tight braids, which seem to have been inspired by the naturally coiling hair of the peoples who lived in Nubia, Egypt's closest neighbor at the time. Oh no! Somebody cancel Egypt! But no. Culture sharing, when done with respect, is all well and good. In fact, on the flip side, the Nubians actually loved Egypt's idea of pyramids so much they ended up building significantly more pyramids than ancient Egypt. Just not as big, so not as well known. Fun fact! Anubis is actually the Greek name for the god and wasn't used by the Egyptians themselves until around the 7th century BC, when the Greeks came over and Greeked all over the place. Before that, he was known as Anpu or Inpu. The root word imp means to decay. And on the surface, it also looks like it has a connection to Inpu. It's pronounced the same, but spelled differently, which means royal child. But you have to remember that ancient Egyptian was a real language with a real complicated rule system and was full of homonyms, just like modern languages. So just because two words seem related doesn't mean they actually are related. But that said, the surface level reading of the two words makes it appear that they are related. So this surface level reading may be what Game Freak based Lucario and Riolu off of, especially when we throw in Horung's beloved conceptions of God in ancient Egypt back into the mix, where he alludes to Anubis's name also being related to the word puppy in the glossary. Though, wanting clarification, we reached out to a respected Egyptologist who specializes in linguistics in ancient Egypt, and they basically said, yeah, there's no real connection. Homonyms at best. Anubis doesn't really have much to do with children and puppies. But again, like Horned Vikings, that doesn't mean Game Freak understood that, and this misunderstanding between Anubis, royal children, and puppies could very well be the reason Lucario's Prevo Riolu is a baby Pokemon specifically, and not just a regular basic Pokemon, which is an often forgotten fact. Yeah, it's a baby Pokemon, and it was the only baby Pokemon introduced at the same time as its adult stage. At the time, anyway. We have Toxel now, but still, it was breaking the precedent of all baby Pokemon being pre-evolutions added in later generations. So it being a baby Pokemon specifically must be very important to its design, lore, and everything. And I think it may be because of that Anubis, Impu, child, puppy homonym. So now, how about Mega Lucario, eh? A Mega Evolution so cool they made it the pseudo-mascot of Mega Pokemon and even gave it to Ash. Its tail now looks like a tail coat. Get it? Get it? Get it? A tail coat? It also now makes Lucario look like he's wearing a shendit, which was a wraparound kilt-like garment that ancient Egyptian men, both royal and peasant, usually wore. They were usually made of linen, which is a similar color to Mega Lucario's tail, and they were often longer in the back than the front, due to the way they were wrapped around and fastened. Mega Lucario's tail just looks like an exaggerated version of that. Also, in Pokemon Unite, there's this skin for Lucario called Ruin Style, and man, is it cool looking! I showed my wife this when it was first announced, and she literally squeed and started info dumping to me about every detail on it. The turquoise colored strips are very reminiscent of the Nemes, a kind of stiff cloth head covering that pharaohs often wore, and were often brightly colored, especially with blues and greens, and was affixed to a headband, which even though the Ruin style skin doesn't really have it connected to a headband, the Pokeball on Lucario's forehead combined with those two strips that are stripes with gold definitely pays homage to this beyond iconic piece of headwear. The gold piece on Lucario's forehead here with the Pokeball and the piece that connects it all together most likely hails back to the uraeus, the part of pharaoh headdresses that have a cobra on it, and is a symbol of how the pharaoh rules over Lower Egypt, because Wadjet, the goddess that protected Lower Egypt, was often depicted as a cobra. On a lot of uraei, Wadjet was accompanied by a vulture head to represent that the pharaoh also rules over Upper Egypt, because the vulture was the symbol of Nekhbet, the goddess that watched over Upper Egypt. The uraei is often seen on the Nemes headdress, so it being combined with the Nemes-inspired strips on the sides of Lucario's face is very accurate. Also, as we mentioned earlier, blues and green blues were used in art to imitate lapis lazuli, turquoise, and other precious gems. One way that the ancient Egyptians imitated those blues was through something called faience, which was a colored glaze that many cultures have used over time on objects, but it was especially prominent in ancient Egypt, where it was honed into a gorgeous art form. A lot of the faience we find today were used as funerary goods, especially shatbi, figurines put in tombs to act as servants in the afterlife. and beads, which could be why it's paired here with Lucario, who is inspired by a god featured so heavily in funerary things. It's honestly really cool to see that some of Unite's skins are somewhat well thought out, even if accidentally. Maybe they just googled how to design Egyptian stuff, you know? After all, most of Unite's skins are like, it's Charizard, as a samurai, Machamp needs a lay, Crustal's got whatever this is, Serena likes cowgirl. And Mamoswine, doesn't Mamoswine just scream, I'm a techno DJ?
Lucario!
But this ruin-style Lucario, mwah, that is some top-tier stuff. But now, what if I told you Lucario isn't entirely Egyptian, as it pulls a few elements from some Eastern aura-sensing tools as well. Namely, the 𝓂𝓆𝆆, or 𝓂𝓆, a metal Buddhist warrior monk tool said to resonate with spirits and can channel the spiritual energy of some people. The way Lucario's dreads sort of flow up when doing its aura sensing is very similar to how the metal rings of these staves would float up in the media that is depicting them being all magical and spirit sensing and such. Actually, funnily enough, Renamon can digivolve into Sakuyamon, who uses this exact weapon. Hilarious and on the nose, huh? And I mean, metal staff-wielding, spirit-sensing Buddhist warrior monk, that just sounds steel fighting type to me, and very Lucario, especially given how many of these staves are designed at the tip. In the middle of the rings, they are often shapes that are kind of similar to the black part of Lucario's face. Maybe if you squint a little. And the rings here may also relate to these metal rings on Lucario's arms too, but more likely it's pulling from the weighted iron rings that some martial artists wear on their arms, and similarly in some media have magic powers. Like perfectly understanding body language, now that's a superpower, and one that Lucario and Riolu have in spades. According to the Pokédex, it can discern the physical and emotional states of people, Pokémon, and other natural things from the shape of their aura waves. It has the peculiar power of being able to see emotions such as joy and rage in the form of waves. In the case of Riolu, it's cool to know that studies have shown that babies are especially adept at picking up expressions and body language, sometimes even better than adults, like it's instinctual. And unlike humans, Riolu doesn't outgrow this ability. Neato. And circling back to Buddhism, knowing the inner self and being very in tune with one's emotions is a vital part of it, and in turn, being very aware of your surroundings and the intentions of those around you is very monk-like as well. So I guess you could say Lucario is a Buddhist Egyptian boxer god warrior monk who's also a furry. With a pretty cool name. And then somehow wonder why it's so popular. Like, that is so many layers of just very popular things. And also, it's edgy!
I can feel your aura. I'm so cool. I'm mysterious and emo. I'm voiced by the guy that did Goku. That makes us practically the same.
Let's talk about that name etymology real quick, because it's actually pretty simple. It's orichalcum's syllables in reverse. Orichalcum being a fantasy, mythical, super powerful metal with magic properties. Pretty well fitting. But what do you think about it? Did it awaken anything in you? Did I miss anything about it? And what do you think of this other super popular furry Gen 4 Pokemon, Luxray? What is it about? What are its magic powers? Well, its video is right here. Check it out, and until next time, never stop using your noggin.